If I were going to sum it up, monitoring is really letting you know, is your system functioning or not? And observability is your way of understanding the system behavior, the good, the bad, the ugly. It's sort of not just scoped to that incident process.
Hey everybody, I'm Brad Bussie, Chief Technology and Security Officer with E360. Thank you for joining me for the State of Enterprise IT Security Edition. This is the show that makes IT security approachable and actionable for technology leaders. Today, we have a special show and some special guests. So joining me are Paige Cruz, Principal Developer Advocate, and Bill Hineline, Field CTO from Chronosphere. And for those of you that don't know, Chronosphere is the observability platform that helps teams zero in on the data that matters. They cut runway telemetry costs and ultimately fix customer impacting issues faster. So thank you both for joining me. I hope you didn't mind my short, shameless plug about Chronosphere there. So let's start the show. So I know our audience comes to us from different levels of maturity. And specifically when it comes to observability, I think some of them would hear OTel and have no idea what we're really talking about. So for those that are maybe a little less familiar with observability, like what does it really mean? And I heard somebody say this the other day, and I wasn't quite sure how to respond to it, but they said, is observability really just SIEM 3.0? So Paige, why don't you kick us off? And what do you think?
What is observability really? That is the, $1 trillion question. I think what I think is important to distinguish is folks who are new to observability should, probably are already familiar with monitoring. You've got data that lets you know if your system is healthy or not, and you set up alerts so that when things go wrong, the engineers on the other end of that status page, our engineers are working on it. They're up in Chronosphere, they're doing DDX, they're checking things out, and you kind of resolve incidents and move on. Observability is sort of, yes, monitoring is important, but the world of observability is not just about issues that are impacting customers that are leading to status page incidents. It can be about improving the performance, improving like snappier load pages. Within the e-commerce world, we know the quicker your page loads, the more conversions you get. That's incredible and not an incident, like slow is the new down, like that sort of thing. So if I were going to sum it up, monitoring is really letting you know, is your system functioning or not? And observability is your way of understanding the system behavior, the good, the bad, the ugly. It's sort of not just scoped to that incident process. Bill, what do you think? Everybody's got their own definition.
No, I like where you go. I typically say that, we graduated from monitoring where people took a very component-focused approach and focused on things like uptime. Observability is really about looking at what service am I offering, right? I'm offering an e-commerce site, and in that e-commerce site, there are several components of that. And so observability lets me know that I'm offering that service the way I intended, right? People can shop a product, people can buy the product, people can do all the things they need to do with the e-commerce site in the way I intend. It's less about, is this service up and is that database working and all of that. And it's more about, I want my customers to be able to buy my widgets in 3 seconds or less. Are we doing that? Great. Perfect. And when they can't, giving you a really good end-to-end picture of where the problem is so that people who have really great maturity in place for their service don't have to spray an organization and do this whole, hey, we don't know where it is, everybody on a call, and let's figure out where the problem is. It's very clear thanks to observability.
I like that. And so when I start to think about this, I'm always like a pillar kind of person. I'm thinking about, we're trying to hold up a house, we're trying to hold up a floor or a ceiling or something. And I've heard before that there are like 3 pillars when it comes to observability. And then I heard the other day And I think Bill, this was you and I were talking about it. There's this fourth, which is culture. What does that look like? Because when I think about the first three, it's like metrics, it's
Yeah.
logs, it's traces, and then that fourth one. Like what do you think of that?
Well, culture, I'm a big fan of advocating for a culture of observability. If you build a tool, but don't think about how you're going to implement it, who's going to use it, how they're going to use it, and then the whole getting people to drink the water kind of a thing, then you're probably not going to have a lot of success. You've got to really think about how you build this culture of observability. So it's not that something that somebody thinks about later, right? With a culture of observability, when the alarms go off, when people start to think that something might be going wrong, observability becomes the first thing they look at. And it's not just the software engineer who owns the service. It might be the network team. It might be the product owner. It might be any number of people looking at it from their different perspective to understand their impact. But to get there, you've got to build this culture. The metrics and traces and logs are something that people tend to look at as the how, and culture is more of the what, right? I mean, but it all has to work together.
Yeah. Paige, you think?
I would almost say culture is the foundation of that house. And what really came to mind is when we think about distributed traces. That was the first type of telemetry I was really introduced to in my career. I was very lucky. And I had said very early on, okay, by whatever, 5 years in the industry, tracing is going to be everywhere. It's going to be great. Like everyone's going to see the value here. And we are like 8 years into my tech career, 10 years now. And tracing is still, it is quite valuable for the orgs that have it and have a culture of observability where they've enabled folks and showed them why traces are valuable and kind of make it a part of the fabric of their investigations. But there are many orgs that have traces that do not have that same culture, that don't get the value. They're paying for all these traces, no one's accessing them. Doesn't mean that the traces are bad. It just means there's a little bit of a culture or enablement problem. So I would say, sure, let's use the pillar. That's a very evocative metaphor, but I would put that culture as the foundation.
And
Like,
part of that culture, also always with Paige, I'm a +1, so I'll +1 her again.
We're our
Um,
biggest fan club.
we are the giant. We make up the founding members of Tracing Fan Club.
Yeah. Yeah.
We both love traces. I've seen it work firsthand in my career. And I think where culture comes in is getting people to understand the power of a trace and what it means. And also that when you're migrating and when you're moving to observability or improving the maturity of your observability, end to end is the ideal state. But you've got to start somewhere. And so teams that stop because they say, oh, well, we don't have end to end. Well, what do you have? That's more than you had before. It's like me trying to motivate myself to run or go to the gym, right? If I walked a mile, that's probably more than I did sitting on the couch yesterday, right? It's the same thing with
Yeah.
traces. Get a little bit in and then build upon it, because that also
Yeah.
excites people when you start to find those problems that were eluding you up to that point.
yeah. I'm thinking of your fan club now, and I'm thinking of like a little kid riding in and getting the decoder ring to drink more Ovaltine. Like I don't know why that came into my head, but that's where I ended up. So thanks for that.
Hey,
So I was going to ask you a question about how do you. So I'm thinking about in organizations, there's a lot of people under stress, duress, load. And this is something that we like to call like a cognitive load. And I'm thinking of modern development environments with this discussion specifically. Do you have any advice on how to reduce some of that cognitive load? And this is
yeah,
for either of you.
I think we can both speak ad nauseum about this, but um, I think that part of the cognitive load has been generated. We've all done this to ourselves, right? Observability, when it first started, came out, and we all were in this, we need to collect everything because we never know what we might find. And I think we all had high hopes that this data would all help tell us all sorts of amazing things. And it can, but with observability data, it's different, right? I mean, if you're in a single tower within technology, if you're a platform person, you're probably getting pretty standard logs that have standard metrics, and it's very consistent. So it's easy to correlate and do things and understand it. When you work in an enterprise where there are even a handful of developers who code slightly differently, who call service names slightly differently, and who maybe know the inner workings, that correlation and all that becomes more difficult. And so you throw on top of that everybody is like throwing all of these ingredients in the pot, and then if there's 40 things that you don't like, you spend a lot of time picking out those 40 things out of the pot to get to what you really like. The downside of that with observability is it creates larger signal to noise ratio, which means there's more false alarms, which means you're doing a lot of context switching. And that context switching is bad. As a matter of fact, and I just had written an article about this recently and quoted, there's a psychological study done by the American Psychological Association on context switching, and it can cause you to lose about 40% of your productivity as it happens regularly.
Oh my God, that's like a staggering number.
When you think about, I think about it, any of my friends who are great developers, they're exactly what you think. Headphones on, hoodie on, heads down, coding, and they're in the zone, right? And then their phone goes off or their text goes off, and they break their concentration because something's broken that they've got to check on. And then they come back. And so the cognitive load that you're talking about is a real thing. I call it the distraction tax because it's killing people. It's killing innovation. It's killing productivity. And we have kind of done it to ourselves over the years.
Yeah. That's why I recommend Pomodoro sessions, and people always give me a hard time. And it's funny because I have a PM, she asks me all the time, hey, do you mind if I break the sauce? So for those of you that don't know, Pomodoro is a method where you spend 25 minutes of deep work. You turn off any way that anybody can get a hold of you, and you focus solely on a task for 25 minutes. You don't do the switching because I agree, Bill, that's very taxing. And then you spend 5 minutes to take a break, check something, do whatever. And then you can go right back into another Pomodoro session. So that's what I've done to try to help some of this over the years. It's been pretty successful. Paige, you have any secrets?
I think there are two things that open standards, when we think of open source compatible telemetry formats like OpenTelemetry, like Prometheus, our good old friend. Thanks to these open standards, there are two things you can do now to reduce the cognitive load for developers who are investigating issues. And that is within one observability platform, maybe it's Chronosphere, make sure that if somebody's looking at a log, they can go to a metric, or they can go to a trace, or vice versa. Make sure that you're showing people within one platform, here's the ways you can go from high-level aggregate view with metrics down to one specific request with the trace, maybe bump back up to look at traces and aggregate, but let all of these telemetry types work for you, because developers often go with what they know and what they're familiar with. So I have a lot of friends that still are logs first, even though I'm, VP of the tracing fan club. People go to their favorite metrics or logs. So I think showing the ways that your data is interconnected and with one click, you can get to a different view of your system is helpful. And then the part where open standards come in is now it's not just within one platform. We can say maybe your logs live in a different platform. Chronosphere's got your metrics and traces. Well, everybody's dashboards now let you do a link or a button. So you can say, hey, guess what? The logs for this service live in Elasticsearch, and we have gone ahead and pre-populated the URL. So you click this one button and you got the same time range, the same query. That saves a lot of time, frustration, and effort. And in fact, you can show people, look at all the platforms that we do have access to. People are running 9, 10 different observability stacks or platforms these days. And sometimes devs don't even know what data lives where or what even they have access to. So I'd say, yeah, connect and correlate that telemetry within platforms and across platforms to let devs really get full advantage of all the data you're paying for.
And I'll add one more thing. I think that on top of Paige's talk about OpenTelemetry and an open standard, there's observability at some point needs to be a utility for everybody using it instead of just another piece of work that they've got to do on a regular basis. And so I talk about taking the friction out of a developer's life when it comes to observability. And we could do a whole probably discussion and segment on that. But going to an open standard for telemetry really does have a lot of advantages in the cognitive load space because it's less to learn. Your central observability team can really provide some packaging around OTel components so that, instrumenting the SDK is a little simpler for them and they don't have to worry about knowing everything about everything. But also that it's just so nice to have logs, traces, and metrics that are all perfectly correlated because OpenTelemetry is formatted it the same. It knows about trace IDs and properly puts trace IDs together to tie things together. So you don't have to rely as much on humans' good governance behavior for things like tagging and other things that I'll bet you if you go into any organization, you'll give a tag standard and there's 40 variations of it.
Yeah, right.
Capital T teams, lowercase teams,
Exactly.
teams _ service.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, Lord.
Well, Paige, you said something interesting around like pay, paying somebody back for something. And it just made me think of like the economics behind observability. And I see this a lot when speaking with clients. They're trying to balance what they're getting from an insight perspective to like what it's actually costing. And we hear this all the time. And I think a lot of it is because of some of the SIEM 1.0s that are still out there and prevalent. And I'm not going to name them because that's just bad form. But they tend to be super expensive. So what's the first thing that everybody does? Well, we need to cut what it is that we're storing. And that's why we all talk about data hygiene and doing transportation before it gets into that repository and all those things. But what would you say, like, how can orgs get that visibility and not break a budget?
I think you really need a platform or tool or maybe a very good technical account manager who is going to help you really look at the usage data. So the cost is one thing, but like I was talking to my partner the other day and it was like, oh, HBO's raising their premium. We should just get rid of it. I never watch it. And he goes, I watch it all the time. And I go, I hadn't. Okay, this is new. So now let's revisit this assumption that we should get rid of it. And I said, well, how much is it worth to you? How much do you think you would want to pay per month? Let's not even look at what we're paying now. Let's just go off of that. And so he was like, oh, if it's more than 20, I'm out. And I said, okay, good news. It's not going to be more than 20 from what I can tell. So like, we'll go ahead. But if I were going to make that decision all on my own, I would have just cut it because I assumed neither of us were watching it. And so when it comes to our observability data, it's not enough to like when people make those cuts to say we've got to reduce the bill. Okay, well, let's just only do 4 days of staging logs, or if let's not even save staging logs before 1 day. And I go, just because it's a lower environment doesn't mean it's less important than your production data. In fact, I would say your staging data is totally important because it's the place where you're going to catch things, but what you can catch before production.
Yeah.
So I really encourage people to look at not just what are you getting charged for. That's like your vendor's billing model. That's there are gripes with how legacy providers have got those set up, but you need to understand not just what you're being charged, but who's using this, where, how. Is this metric really expensive, but it's in 10 of your SLO alerts? That's totally worth keeping and paying for. So I really encourage people to think in terms of what is the value of this metric providing, or trace or log or whatever, in terms of are people looking at it? Is it being used And then we can look at cost and make those judgments. Bill, what do you think? You've seen many an observability invoice. I don't
Yes.
know that they quite frame things the way I do in terms of cost and usage. What is your advice?
I think that, I mean, you're spot on. I think I'm big on talking to people about, number one, breaking this cycle of collect everything, like I was talking about before. But when I talk to folks about like how do I instrument my service, I start by asking, well, why does it exist? Somebody on your business
Mm,
team decided we want to offer this capability. All right, great. What was their expectation? How fast should it be? What's their tolerance for it being unavailable? What's their tolerance for error and risk? And build your metrics stack based on that, your metrics and traces and logs based on that. Instead of just, I'm going to log everything, I'm going to collect all of these metrics and figure all that out. Be really intentful about what you collect. And then to your point, figure out how you define the value of that metric and how do you make sure that that value is actually there, right? If you're collecting a Kubernetes label for a pod and you have 1,000 pods at normal time and you're collecting that metric every second, that's a lot of cardinality for a label that probably doesn't have a lot of value and you're paying for it. So you've got to understand what you're collecting, have a decision that says, I'm collecting this for a very clear reason, and then stick with it. And that's not to say that people don't wind up with maybe metrics that are partially useful, but there are a lot out there, I would argue, and that I've seen that have almost no value and people pay a lot for them.
I see this a lot in regulated environments where, and this doesn't have to be like DoD type stuff. This actually happens a lot in healthcare where people are afraid to quote unquote throw anything away. They're
mm,
not even 100% sure what they should be keeping or what they should be doing with it.
They
So
got
I'm always
FOMO.
interested. Yeah. I'm interested, like, how does, from your view, like, how does observability data actually interact with some of these compliance standards? And do you have any advice? Because I know we have a lot of healthcare listeners,
Yeah.
so I'm sure they're interested.
I think that observability, one of the things that's come around over the years is a pipeline, right? And you
Yeah.
need a pipeline that works with your observability platform. Those pipelines do things like take data and look, to be fair to our software engineering friends out there, people collect a lot of data for good reason. When I said collect with intent, they probably have intent. Maybe they've got a noisy service that gets them into the spotlight when they don't want it a lot. Or maybe they've got a service that people don't understand and they're constantly having to defend themselves. So they log a lot more than they would normally because they're trying to do that. Does that need to go to observability? Maybe not, especially if it's more of a CYA metric. But a pipeline will help you take things that maybe you don't need in the observability platform or your SIEM platform or whatever, and put it somewhere else. A cheaper storage, offline storage, right? Maybe there are things that you're logging that maybe the pipeline could do something really cool. Like, all right, well, that log entry I don't really care about. What I care about is the data in the log, and it's actually something that if I were doing it a different way, I could make a metric. Well, good pipelines will help you turn a log entry into a metric so you don't have to store the log, right? And then to your point about like regulated industries, certainly nobody, I think, purposely breaks the rules of HIPAA or PCI or PII or any of that, but it happens. It happens because you're debugging and forget to turn it off. I mean, there's a million legitimate reasons why it happens. What you can do though is use this pipeline also to redact, right? You know the data patterns that are flowing through your system that you never want to see, right? So you can build patterns to redact those should they inadvertently get pulled through your environment. So that's another thing. And pipelines also do some really cool things like enrich. Maybe you've got some legacy logs that didn't take into consideration that more than one person needs to look at it. And so they don't have a lot of data. Maybe you can use a pipeline to enrich it with something basic like an application name or a timestamp or a region or things that maybe aren't in there today.
That's perfect.
Yeah,
Paige?
I
Yeah.
think I understand the knee-jerk reaction, especially on the security side. Like, more data is better. If I have more at my fingertips, like maybe this one tag is the thing I would have needed to understand last week's security incident. Like, for example. So I think if you start with what is in your threat model, and if something in your threat model is we cannot ever let PII leave our VPC, our cloud, our data center, then go through that scenario. Okay, so yes, that's what we don't want to happen. What happens today if PII gets out? Do we have those processes in place? Can we double check our observability pipeline config to make sure that we're testing that the password field isn't getting logged or et cetera? I think bringing it down to like those what if scenarios, just asking, hey guys, what would happen today if something got into the logs? That question sparks a good conversation, and is kind of a way to get started on improving this posture. Because then you can say, would this tag have helped me? Yes or no? Let's get rid of it. It gives you, once you bring it down to even a napkin math concrete example, people can start to maybe let go of those fears, because it's not catastrophizing. It's talking about something a little more grounded.
And if you had a way to understand, like if you're having the fear of, I might need this, then having a tool that gives you that insight to say, you've never used this, becomes a really great, like, mental assistant for you, right? To calm the anxiety of, what if I throw this away?
Yeah. I love that. That's why we do tabletops all the time in cybersecurity.
Yes.
Because we want to simulate the what ifs and you see how people really respond. I think this is another great example of how you could do that with your own telemetry and data. I love it.
Oh yeah.
So I've been thinking about this because we're getting closer to the end of 2025. So whenever you're listening to this, hopefully, it's in 2030 and we're like super popular. But
all our predictions have come true, and
yeah,
we're
so
zillionaires.
yeah, and we're just kind of hanging out on the beach.
I was going to say, I don't plan on talking about observability in 2030.
Right. I don't think I'll talk about security either. I'll be talking about sci-fi or something. But like how are industry leaders rethinking observability for the rest of this year or even next year? Like what are some of the things that you're hearing, some of the asks, some of the things that maybe the both of you are working on that, don't give me anything that's NDA type stuff, but
sure.
What do you think is in store for us in 25 and 26?
I would say everybody is talking AI as always. But I think that, we have to address the data problem first with companies. Certainly cost has been high at the top of list for a lot of companies who are embracing observability, and they're struggling with, how do I continue to deploy observability in my environment and not have the cost outpace my business growth, right? Which we see happening. And it's all about the data, but it's also about data quality. And that really comes into the AI discussion as well, right? I mean, garbage in, garbage out definitely plays a role here. And so back to a great reason, another plus one for OpenTelemetry, because it helps you control that. Also thinking about your telemetry strategy and how you're going to gather, and gathering with intent, like I was saying. But I also think that we will see, from an AI perspective, less of a focus on predictive and more of a focus on making people's lives easier through making things faster, right? So you may not have observability tools that are trying to predict things for you. They might offer guidance, but we are likely to see agentic really step up here and help with, hey, I saw you doing this and this and this. when you did this, when we had this problem before, can I make a suggestion for a run book? Or, hey, did you notice all of these things are correlated together and there was also a release, right? Things that a human can do, but can take you time, even in the best tool, to sort through a bunch of different dashboards and screens and that sort of thing. I see agentic really stepping in to help there, and in a lot of spaces, right? Everybody's worried about AI taking all of our jobs, and I don't think that that's going to be the case. I think AI will help make our jobs easier and allow us to constantly innovate. It's sort of like, I spent 20 something years in the airline industry, and when kiosks came out, the employees in the airports thought that the kiosk was going to take over their job, and that's not the case. What it did was take people who wanted to change their seat or really simple transactions and got them out of line, which meant that the agents could focus on the really complex and valuable things. I think the same will happen with AI.
I'm always thinking of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where Charlie's dad is in there and he's screwing the cap on the toothpaste, and then he loses his job, and then he comes back because he's the guy that's fixing the robot that took his job to screw the cap onto the toothpaste. So yeah, I don't think it's someone or AI themselves that's going to take somebody's job. It's someone who knows how to leverage AI and work with an agent that's going to take someone's job who just keeps doing it the same way.
Yeah.
So
it's an evolution.
Yeah. Perfect. Now, Paige, anything you want to say about that one? I've got a couple of more just top of mind.
Oh yeah, let's move on. I think Bill kind of covered it. Like we're observing AI workloads. That's new. Also, how do we use AI to reduce the cognitive load? Both sides of the coin. I think it's a space that's evolving so fast, and observability can't ever be before the technical innovations. Observability comes a little bit in lockstep tandem, and so I think if your company is going into those emerging domains or really investing heavily, you've got to be also looking at how do we change our observability posture, stance, skills, and knowledge to keep up. So yeah just +1.
I think that takes us into how we can leverage observability to be more proactive, because I think there's an argument to be had that some people are always looking back and they're saying, well, because of this, we can make a better decision for operations going forward. But how do we get to more of a proactive model? Paige, I'll start with you.
Time, space, and discussions, things that that we don't have lots of, especially if you're in a startup or in a fast-paced organization. But it does take, I do really think discussions are the place to start. I've tried the policy first, rules mandate approach. I've tried the appeal to leaders, and then hopefully we can cascade things down. But what has worked for me time and time again is starting grassroots, developer to developer, getting the folks together who are interested and want to learn, turning them into change agents on their team, giving them just enough knowledge and skills about this is where our data lives. Here's some ways that I've used traces that I found helpful to solve this problem. Now you go forth and share that with your teams. That's really where I've seen building space and time for learning together across teams, across domains. That has gotten the best bang for my buck in terms of time and people actually looking at their dashboards, looking at their alerts, taking action because they know somebody cares and might want to hold them accountable. But not in a blamey way, but in if you improve the observability of your service, that helps me because my service depends on you. And sometimes I have to troubleshoot across the connection. Really showing people observability is a shared responsibility, and are you pulling your weight?
Bill?
I'll +1 to Paige as always.
But it can't just be grassroots. It can't just be Paige bringing everybody along.
No, but I also think that when I look at observability, I think that organizations tend to really overcomplicate things really quickly. And again, back to, I sound like a broken record, but collecting everything was part of the problem. I think if you really stepped back and thought about, here's my app, here are the 5 most important features, and you start with the golden signals, you know, that's 4 metrics, and then you add tracing and you have logs in to add color. You've got a gold mine, there. And then and instead of thinking about SLOs later at the end, you start with an SLO and an error budget. You'd be surprised how much an error budget burn rate can help you predict better than you'd think. And people are reacting because they're seeing alerts, and our alerts are often tied to, you know, a service failure or a giant rise in error rate or that sort of thing. But what if you started with, you know, your burn rate on your error budget, right? And if it's a really critical thing, then maybe your alerting for your change in burn rate is very precise. But there's some predictability that exists today that people aren't using. And so I go back to getting the foundations right. And that involves data, that involves starting with an SLO and error budget, gets you in a great place. So as technology evolves, as AI gets better, as the agentic capabilities evolve, then you really can get to the more predictive that we have all been dreaming about. But right now, you're just going to have Hal say, I'm sorry, I can't do that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You said something too that made me think. You said complexity, and then you eloquently put how to simplify it. But what do we do when we have like a multi-cloud environment? I've got multiple teams, and it's super chaotic. Like I'm looking for, like, how do we build some clarity, but most importantly, like, how do we do it at scale? Do you have any advice on that?
Well, I think it's even more reason to keep it simple. When you have complexity is going to exist, right? We're gone are the days of a monolithic app. And I will tell you, after many late night calls in my career, there were times I'd look at these massive distributed systems and these large, you know, multi microservice architectures that I longed for the days of a mainframe. But just because it felt like it would be easier to produce. But the reality is, with great observability and specifically traces, and you keep your metrics, you start simple and build on that. Even the most complex environment is really just a set of these services that need to work together. And you care about things like, you know, how much latency is it? What's the traffic? What's the volume? What's the saturation? Am I taxing my environment and I'm not auto scaling properly? If you just looked at those 4 things, I'll bet you money you're going to find out a lot of what's going on in your environment quickly. And then you add on, right? You know, maybe you've got a specific set of technology in your environment that you're concerned about. Maybe you're a messaging organization. You have heavy messaging, and so you care about queue depths and queue age and that sort of thing. Or maybe you have Kafka and you care about replicas, and so you want to have awareness on replicas. So you add over time. But if you try to boil the ocean all at once, then you just add to what's already a complex environment that you have to instrument. But if you have a repeatable pattern that says every app will always have the 4 golden signals and will always have logs, traces, and metrics, you really set
you've
yourself
done
up for a much better quality of life, frankly.
You've hit something when I'm taking notes during a podcast. So I'm writing down the four golden pieces there. That's I'll dare say a little bit of gold. Paige?
I really, it's a +1 in that case. Multiple clusters, multiple clouds. Maybe you got EKS, GKE, AKS. If you're really going for the big 3, standards are your friend. You've got to, like Bill said, find a way to simplify. These are the 4 signals we care about for our applications. If you really need to go into a specific cloud provider to find a specific piece of data that maybe they have that whatever, sometimes there's some issues with how frequently we would like the data versus when clouds are willing to offer us for scrape intervals. But like letting folks know this is where you go. These are the things we care about. I don't care what cloud it is. I don't care what cluster. Giving people that standard, that security blanket of those standards really enables everybody to participate in observability. Otherwise, you get these local pockets of expertise based on what technologies folks are most familiar with, and you troubleshoot in silos, and it takes so much longer.
Right.
Which goes back to killing the idea of a culture of observability. If observability exists and everybody has access to it and everybody knows what it is, but nobody knows how to find anything, then you haven't really gained anything, because you're still killing your top performers. You're building heroes when they may or may not necessarily want to be a hero all the time. And then the next thing you know, they've got open to work on their LinkedIn. So, you know, um, I just think, like Paige said, building some governance, and people hear that word and they think, oh, we got to be agile, we got to innovate. You can't innovate if you don't have some guardrails, because if you don't have guardrails, then you're going to build up a lot of technical debt. You're going to have a million different ways, for example, that observability is set up across a million teams. And if there's anything that you want people to be consistent on, it's observability. So having some guidance and having, whoever, whether it's your SRE team, or if you're lucky enough to have a central observability team, whatever, who builds some sort of starter kit that makes that friction really low for the developer and provides some of this framework, and sets an expectation up front. Stop stressing about what to monitor. Start with these 4 things and apply them to the things that are the very reason this app exists and why people call you when it's not working.
People are the most important part of observability. Maybe that is the 4th pillar, with culture as the foundation.
Yeah. Yep.
I did want to bring something up. I just finished reading the 2025 DORA report, and kind of on this thread, they talked about, without a clear organizational stance, like an AI policy, here is how we as a company, here's what we think is acceptable use, here is unacceptable use. In the absence of a clear policy, developers ended up on 2 ends of the spectrum. They either overused AI in unacceptable ways because they didn't have the clarity, and they are maybe the builders, the people that love the bleeding edge. So not great overuse in unacceptable ways. Or the conservative folks, the rule followers, underused it. They didn't take full advantage of it when they could, because they erred on the side of caution. And I see this in observability when people say, oh, I'm afraid to add a metric, or we just have to live with 2 days of staging data. That's just how it is. It's like, no, let's have a clear stance on what observability means to us, what makes it valuable, what we're willing to pay for. And that lets people make the best decisions using their expertise and experience.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking about something as you're talking. It's this trust model that we're trying to establish in this new era. Like, can I trust that you used AI, or can I trust that you didn't use AI? Can I trust that you used it just enough? And I know in environments, I often see platform teams and developers that have a little bit of trust issue between the two of them. And I'm always thinking about, well, if I'm gathering telemetry and all of these other things, like what could I potentially do with observability where I can get those two teams actually maybe trusting each other a little bit more?
That's something that I've seen in real life. And observability, if done well, can get teams to work better together. They might be a little bit resistant at first, but in one of my former roles, one of the biggest users of the observability platform was the NetOps team. They got really tired of being blamed for being the network, and it rarely was.
Always the network.
It's always the network.
Shout out to all the network engineers out there.
Yes.
You really are doing the real work.
I was a sysadmin because I couldn't take the heat.
Yeah. Well, sysadmins went through it too. Your server's broken. No, it's not. I was a Unix guy back in the day. So
it works on my machine.
Yeah, exactly. But what it did was gave the network team got really well versed with our observability platform, and they were able to do things like, okay, I hear what you're saying. I hear that you say that you think there's slowdown or latency between these two servers or there's a firewall problem. Well, let me show you the data from what I'm seeing in observability that shows you that. And then they got really good and said, and now let me show you the trace that shows you the method and class where you have an error rate that jumped. And then let me show you the marker where you just deployed something.
And what I'm hearing from that is it was not, which I am guilty of sometimes just sending people links. Well, yes, it's in the dashboard. Can't you see? What I really heard, what broke down that barrier, what made that collaboration possible is let me show you, like we're doing this together. And afterwards, I'm sure some folks were like, hey, can you show me that again? Or like, how do I have access to that? I'm sure that let me show you approach opened up and started to heal some of those trust breakdowns.
And also, and I used to joke with my former team as we would work with folks, I would say, look, when we're on a call and there's 200 people on this call, you've got to think about how you're packaging what you're seeing without judgment. It's just facts.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because you can't, sometimes you have to tell people they have an ugly baby.
This is my favorite Billism.
Up front.
Sometimes you have to tell people they have an ugly baby, but you can say it in a way that's like, I see your baby has 3 eyes. Now, was that planned or
the unique feature? You got to sandwich it, Bill. You gotta do the good, bad, good sandwich.
Right. Exactly. Right now, it's so you got to, I think doing that, to Paige's point, helps soften the blow. Look, I'm coming to the table with data from my environment to answer the question you had, but I also see this. So can we look at these things too? And as people start to see that there's an awareness of that, they tend to come to the table more prepared. It delivers a level of transparency and accountability among people that doesn't always have to climb the organizational chart.
That's great. I could honestly talk to the both of you forever, but I feel like I will ask you one more question.
Ooh, the final question. All right.
Well, you know, the two of us and you could probably talk till the
We're chatty.
end of time. We're chatty.
I agree. So I have a feeling people are going to be asking us for another one of these. But maybe this will be the best answer to a question ever, and we can just
and we'll be done with it. We'll have solved observability. Everybody could go home.
We're going to the beach again. So this one's pretty simple. What do you see as the future of observability? Thinking beyond dashboards, beyond some of the stuff that we've talked about with AI. AI can be a part of it, but what does the future of observability look like to the two of you?
I think it becomes more open. I think that people will embrace things like OpenTelemetry. And I think it becomes table stakes. People have historically sort of done, oh, well, we probably need to put some observability in place. I think I see it taking the journey that cyber took 10 years ago when companies didn't necessarily have a CISO, or maybe they didn't have a big cyber practice, and now they have to out of necessity. I think that through different level of urgency, but similar urgency, observability is in the same boat. And we're in this journey of making it a first-class citizen in different organizations. And they realize it has to happen. And there are things that we have to help people do to get there, just like we had to do in cyber, right? With tools, with standards, with guidance and strategy and that sort of thing. But I think it will continue to evolve. And I think, we've talked about AI, so I don't think we need to run down that again. But I think it becomes a standard. It's not just something that we talk about as people should do. And I think that people are going to start being measured on the business value of observability. I talk all the time about how if your CFO knows what observability is because of the budget number instead of the value it brings, then you're probably, your math is upside down.
Couldn't agree more. Paige?
I think I've really changed I had an inflection point this year, and I used to really think you've got to know the fundamentals. I need you to know about each telemetry type. And even within a metric, you should know the nuances between a gauge and a counter and why we want the new native histograms in Prometheus. Like I used to think of, you have to understand a lot about the data before you can actually interpret what you're seeing when we're aggregating and visualizing. Look, that I still think that's a great idea. If you really want a solid foundation in observability and you want to be the expert, go ahead and do that. But the reality is today, I could open up any dashboard that I haven't seen before, and I can ask an agent, an LLM. I can ask questions about that in human language, or even, what is this query doing? Please just explain it to me step by step. I think we're about to see, or we should be seeing more in the future, not needing to be the expert in PromQL or KQL or whatever. I think the expertise around specific query languages will be important for a few, but really to unlock the value of observability, that's got to be democratized. And I do actually think that's an area where LLMs can be helpful. And I think, like, overall big sky picture, like connecting observability across domains. Right now, people say mobile observability. We've got backend, we've got network observability. Observability is supposed to encompass all of those things, but so far we've been building point solutions. We have the open standards to connect. And so observability in the future should encompass all of those things. We maybe only need to reference mobile observability in specific use cases, but I hope the meaning of observability is across the stack up and down, not just for backend, infra, and SRE types. That's the future I want to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you both nailed it. I mean, I think we're going to see a lot more integrations. I think we're going to see a far more intelligent correlation engine across all the different stacks, like you said. And I think foundationally, it's just going to be more automation. And I think most of that is going to come from AI. That's the only thing I'll say about AI in this context, is that's what it's good at. It's good at automating things. It's good at correlating things. And I think there's a lot of bright future for observability. So Paige, Bill, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules at Chronosphere. Honestly, this is a very enjoyable podcast to me.
I had a great time.
Yeah,
We really could chat forever. My God.
Yeah. And so to our listeners, thank you again for joining us for the State of Enterprise IT Security Edition. Have a good one.